A behind-the-scenes look at how games are made and the people who make them. This is Game Dev Deconstructed. Hello and welcome to another episode of Game Dev Deconstructed. I'm your host, Nick Culbertson, and today I'm talking with Britton Peele. That's at Britton Peele on Twitter. Britton is an editor, producer, and all-around geek critic for Guide Live and the Dallas Morning News. Our talk focuses on his perspectives as a member of the gaming press, covering topics like the do's and don'ts of contacting press, refining your pitch, and understanding what goes on in the mind of a game journalist. Britton has a wealth of knowledge on game journalism, having been a freelance writer for sites like GameSpot and now covering all things geek-related for one of the nation's largest newspapers. I had a great time getting an inside look into his world, and I hope you will too. So, without further ado, I bring you Britton Peele. Welcome back to Game Dev Deconstructed. I'm here today with Britton Peele, who has a lot of titles based on your LinkedIn, but It looks like most recent what you're doing is you're producing and editing the entertainment section of Dallas Morning News Online and Guide Live.
Yeah. So that's I'm one of the editors. My business card, whenever I get them, has a lot of titles on it because I'm like a geek culture writer and editor and all sorts of other things. That's my full-time job. I've done some freelancing for GameSpot in the past, Games Radar, a bunch of places like that. So writing is my thing.
Yeah, so when people ask you, like, if your mom is like, what do you do? What do you usually tell somebody?
Usually I will say, it kind of depends. If I'm, among fellow geeks, I will, say, hey, I write about video games or I review video games, that kind of thing. If I'm around some less geeky family or say my wife's family, I might say, I work for the Dallas Morning News. I work for a newspaper because that's kind of easier for them to digest. But yeah, that's kind of the long and short of it is I write about pop culture. I write about superhero movies, that kind of thing. Just anything geeky that I can get my hands on.
So I think a lot of people would look at that and think, oh, well, that's a dream job, getting to go to the new movies or play the new games and then write about it and actually have an audience listen to what you have to say. So how might those people be right and how might they be wrong?
Well, I'm definitely not shoveling coal for a living. So, in a lot of ways, yeah, it's a great, fantastic job. I love what I do. It's kind of funny when people are like, oh, you get to play games for a living. That's amazing. Well, it's amazing unless your assignment is to review Kung Fu High Impact for the Kinect while Batman Arkham Asylum is waiting for you and you have to finish a bad game before you can play the good one. It is a job. There's things about it that I actually spend a lot more time, 8 hours a day, in front of a computer doing, kind of the more boring stuff instead of playing games. So it's a fun job. I enjoy it a lot, but it's still work. I'm, producing a lot of content and have goals I need to meet and that kind of thing. And I'm in a really stressful industry. Game journalism in particular is not raking in money exactly. And it's the kind of job where you're underpaid and everybody on the internet hates you. So it's a lot of fun. But I wouldn't be doing anything else. I love what I do.
Yeah. And so since you mentioned it, what does your daily routine look like on a regular day?
Sure. So since I am kind of more of an editor at the Dallas Morning News, I do a lot of I manage some of the other writers a little bit too, and I help manage our website, guidelive.com. If you're in Dallas, is a things to do website, and we do a lot of entertainment stuff. So, places to eat, places to drink, and events to go to. So I'm running support on a lot of that stuff. I'm also, if Selena Gomez does something crazy, since she's from here, I might, have to write up a story real quick. And even though, I'm not a huge Selena Gomez fan, it's news and I work for a newspaper. So, I've got to do a lot of different things, wear a lot of different hats. So a lot of my day-to-day, Monday through Friday is sitting at a desk doing whatever needs to be done in that moment. If I've got free time, then I'm hunting down some, more video game related stories usually, or I try to cover the, geeky stuff either in and around Dallas or in general. So I try to claim all the superhero movies for review, and I try to cover Fan Expo Dallas and the geeky events that are near here.
Yeah. I'm curious. I just this year started something called the 5-Minute Journal. Are you familiar with this at all?
I don't think so.
So
Tell me about it.
the synopsis of what it is you every morning you write down 3 things you're grateful for, 3 things that would make that day awesome, and a daily affirmation.
Okay.
So it's kind of a cool exercise, but then at the end of the day, you pick it back up and you write 3 great things that happened, and you write how you could have made today better. Well, anyways, in doing this, I've found that I do have a large vocabulary, but I don't use it. In terms of whenever I'm talking about something that would make today great, like for this morning, I was saying, I hope to have a great podcast with Britton. And it's like, I started to realize that the words great and good and awesome are just throwaway words that aren't really saying what you're meaning to say. And I recently read your article on inner space and noticed how you were using different words to sort of paint a better picture than just saying, it's a really great game, something
I'm
like
glad
that.
you feel that way, because sometimes I'm not sure if I'm succeeding in that exact goal. So Thank you for saying so.
Oh, well, yeah. So whenever I was about to write, I hope I have a great conversation with Britton Peele. I was thinking instead I would write, I hope to have a thoughtful conversation, something that is a little more descriptive of what I'm meaning. But I've noticed with your writing, it's definitely on a different level, and I don't know if it's because you came to it with that skill or if you've just cultivated it over writing again and again. So my question is, how have you cultivated your writing skill, and how have you changed your approach over time?
Practice mostly, so it's the latter of the two things. So I've always wanted to be a writer. I was in elementary school for a while. I always kind of liked writing and whatnot, and then I started homeschooling when I was in 5th grade, partly for health reasons. And so I was never a super active kid. I would stay home reading and writing. And then especially in college, I always wanted to write fiction, but in college I started writing for the college newspaper at Texas Tech, the Daily Torador, and I was writing opinion columns and doing some video game coverage there. It's actually when I first started working as press, I reached out to, I think Nintendo was the first company I reached out to, and they were actually super receptive of saying like, yeah, we'll send you our new, Wii game about scuba diving and, that kind of thing. And I kind of reached a point where like I was never, my grades were always good, but I definitely reached the point where I was like, I need to find a way to make money doing this, or like back off of, playing fewer video games or writing a little less, that kind of thing. And thankfully, I was able to find the way to make money doing it. I kind of discovered freelancing. So I started writing articles for GamesRadar.com when I was maybe senior year in college. Actually started a little later than some freelancers do. And then started doing reviews for them. I was reviewing a lot of Sims 3 expansion packs, because that's the kind of caliber of game they give you when you're a brand new freelancer and they don't know how, what your skill level is, how much they can trust you. You get that kind of thing. And then, just so years and years of doing this both as an amateur and then professionally, and working with great editors. That's another big thing. Thankfully, in my career, I've worked with some amazing people like Susan Arendt, who is now actually editing a Magic website, but she used to be at Games Radar and other places before that. I worked with Kevin at he was at GameSpot. Now he's working on the Divinity games, I think. And just working with people who are able to tell you, like, your writing is good here, but you suck over here. So, like, do this thing less, do this thing more. And surrounding yourself with people like that, pretty common in the industry, I think. If you surround yourself with people who are able to actually give you good constructive criticism, is always going to help you get better. So I've been blessed enough to have people to tell me when I suck, when I don't, and offer encouragement and advice at the same time. But more than anything, it's just that practice. There's not a day that goes by when I'm not writing several hundred words at least, if not a few thousand. So it's just a thing that comes to you over time.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is figuring out ways to get that feedback if you're not in a position where your feedback loop is someone saying, this is crap, this is great,
Totally.
kind of thing. Because if, as a game developer, a lot of times you have to be your own media, at least until you get to a point where your story is compelling enough to have someone else write about it. So things like a developer blog or something like that. And even though you feel like you might be writing those things and no one's actually hearing it, it'd be nice to get that feedback. I wonder if you could get that just by asking other developers or writers, if there's a way to synthesize that feedback.
Yeah, it's interesting because, in the age of the internet, you can get feedback immediately. It feels like you post a tweet and there will be a million people ready to tell you how much they hate you if that tweet reaches the right people. So the internet helps, I think. But yeah, I think if you can find local, if you're a game developer, finding local game development communities with people who can play builds of your games and help offer you feedback, that kind of thing, I think would be super helpful, super important. For a writer, there's always writers' conferences, workshops, that kind of thing, and websites devoted to, hey, post your writing here and people will give you feedback on it, and that's what that community exists to do. So I think if you can find communities like that in whatever you're trying to do, whether it's game development, writing, art, anything like that, people exist who want to have their stuff, critiqued and critique other stuff so that you can sharpen each other and make each other better. And finding those people, I think, is really important.
Excellent. Okay, so to transition to the next topic I wanted to talk about, which is some of the do's and don'ts for contacting media outlets, I wanted to preface it with an email I had sent for my game whenever I was trying to get it featured.
Okay.
And a lot of these outlets will just have an email that's like a tips@Touch Arcade or something like that.
It's not always the most helpful, but it's at least something.
Right.
Yeah.
And some of those, like I did that for Pocket Gamer, and someone actually ended up writing for Pocket Gamer an article about the game. So I was pleased with that. That at least made me know, okay, people are reading this. So someone from a local publication had come to Node, the co-working space we're at. That's the background for it. And this is the email I sent them. Hello, blank. I'm Nick Culbertson, an indie app developer in Dallas. We met at Node a few months ago, and I wanted to share this release with my new game, Epic Orchestra, a swipe-based rhythm game for iPhone and iPad. The game is currently featured on the front page of the App Store in the New Games We Love category. I'm writing to see if you'd be interested in covering the recent release and feature in the blank publication that you write for. Then I also provided a link to the app, some background on the app, and a preview video so they could see what it was about. So then they wrote back just saying, Nick, thanks for your note. Since there are so many startups and tech companies in town, I have a pretty high bar for coverage. I wait until companies have a large number of downloads, major investments, etc. When you reach those milestones, feel free to circle back. All the best, writer's name. So before we go into it, how do you think I could have worded that differently, or do you think there should have been more of a relationship before the ask? What's your initial assessment of that?
My initial assessment, actually, having seen a lot of really bad pitches, is that you actually did really well.
Okay.
So take comfort in that. You established a relationship beforehand, you referenced that relationship, and you made an effort to show why your game matters, which is what... So, there's probably, if I were to open my phone and show you right now, I would probably have a couple thousand unread emails. And a lot of those are from people who didn't even bother to find out what I write about. I actually get a lot of beauty pitches for whatever reason. I have a name that maybe some people think is actually Brittany, not Britton, and that kind of thing. So I get a lot of pitches saying like, hey, please cover this new beauty salon opening in Dallas. Like, no, like if you have read a word of what I write about, that's not it. I'm a straight white dude that has no hair on top of his head. Like you offered nothing for me. So it's so you already did a lot of good things you had met this person before. You probably knew the kind of things they covered, and you gave links to the thing you're pitching and a video for the thing you're pitching. That's a lot of really good stuff. Unfortunately, what this writer told you is extremely true, is that like we get so many pitches for so many things that we have to have a really high bar, which actually really sucks, because as someone who loves video games and who loves indie games, like I most of what I reviewed at GameSpot was actually indie games. The unfortunate thing is that a lot of indie coverage does not get near the traffic that Call of Duty coverage gets, for example. Even if the indie game is way more exciting than Call of Duty is. And as a lot of outlets are increasingly more traffic driven, it's can be harder to justify sometimes, like writing about just every game that comes along. So you really need to set yourself apart from the herd, because anybody could have a Unity asset flip game or an RPG Maker game and just say like, hey, I'm local and I made this game, please write about it. Like, not really enough. You did a really good thing in saying, hey, my game that was made here in Dallas is on the front page of the App Store right now. Like that is a notable thing. I think if you were... So just like thinking locally, because I do a lot of local coverage, when Bonus XP did their Stranger Things game, like that's a notable thing, even if it wasn't at the top of the download charts necessarily when being pitched. Stranger Things is a big deal, and if a local company is doing a Stranger Things thing, that's notable and that's worthy of a news story. So if you have something like that, where you have a good publishing deal or your game is about to be released worldwide or anything like that, will help you when pitching to news organizations above just saying, hey, I made a game, please give me coverage because I really want this thing to do well, which like I understand, and I want your game to do well too. I want every game to do well. I love video games. But since we have such a limited amount of time as press, and we a lot of times have goals we need to meet too. And so if we're looking to get a certain amount of traffic a month, and it can be really hard to focus entirely on indie games all that month if people really want to read like about Madden or, whatever the example might be. So unfortunately, some of the problem is that you might not be doing anything wrong. You might make an awesome game that like is awesome, and it still can be hard to really pitch yourself successfully. And I wish I had a better answer for you than that.
Well, I feel like the getting to know the person in the digital age, it's so much easier to get to know someone, even if it's through that artificial layer of Twitter of I liked and retweeted the things that you've done. Have there been any examples you can think of someone building a relationship with you that has led to you writing about their product?
The most immediate example is actually the other way around, where I actually got a lot of freelance writing work just from Twitter, where I, would interact with writers and editors, and then when they would say, hey, I need a freelancer for this, or in one magical case, hey, I need a freelancer in Dallas for this, like, oh, pick me, and you are familiar with my name because we tweet it at each other a lot. So yeah, digital relationships definitely help for sure. I think I could give you kind of an answer of long lines of what you're looking for. So you referenced my Innerspace article at the beginning of the podcast. Innerspace, for those that don't know, made here in Dallas for a bunch of UTD graduates, was just published by Aspire, made by about 7 guys and some contract work. I actually played that game first in, I think, 2015 at the Screw Attack Games Convention, which isn't in Dallas anymore. Maybe it doesn't even happen anymore. I don't remember. But so I first played that game then and didn't write about it until now, the beginning of 2018. I played it. I played an early build of it. I met a couple of the people working on it. But, they didn't have a publishing contract yet. They had a build that I liked. Like, even from that early build, I was able to say, oh, this flying in this feels really good. So, and I liked the look of it. So it caught my attention. I wanted to keep up with it, so I followed the devs on Twitter. And Eric Brody, kind of their community management marketing guy, followed me on Twitter. And he did kind of the things you were saying. Like, he would like some of my stuff. He replied to some of my stuff. And I don't think I actually saw him in person since 2015 until earlier this month or late 2017 when I went to their offices to see Innerspace again because it was about to launch. So we made that initial contact in person, But yeah, I remembered Eric's name because of Twitter and because of that digital relationship. So yeah, that kind of thing definitely does work. And well, like I said, it's important to me as a member of the press or just as a person, if like when you pitch me, you clearly know who I am and the kinds of things I cover. So seeing your name and face on Twitter helps a lot. And you being able to reference work I've done, stories I've written, that kind of thing, makes it obvious that you're not just shilling your product and just firing off pitches to anyone who you could possibly get your hands on. You actually looked into, okay, who at the Dallas Morning News covers video games? Oh, it's this guy. Let me read about him and get to know him a little bit. Then I'll pitch him. That actually does go a long way.
And so then thinking how global is local, how would someone go about if there isn't this degree of separation of, hey, we're both from Dallas, this is a Dallas project, try to achieve having someone from GameStop or GameSpot rather, and Touch Arcade? How, aside from going through the tip line, is it sort of the same thing where you're looking to see who is writing for this publication and I'm not suggesting people spam these people's inboxes or anything.
Yeah, that can turn us off real quick.
Yeah.
Just for the record.
So that's a part of what I wanted to hear about.
Yeah.
So the don't side, because I'm sure people are privy to some of what should work or could work and sort of abuse those pathways.
Yeah, and a lot of it's a tricky balance. And it's amazing, and this is true, I think, of just life in general. It's amazing how far you can get by just being like a decent person. And, if you have at least a little bit of charm, it helps a lot, because you could do the right things, but with the wrong attitude and still kind of fall on your face. So if you're a big fan of Patrick Klepek at Waypoint and you know the kinds of games that Patrick Klepek is into, then you could, if you've made a game that you think would really appeal to him, you could send your message to the tips line at Waypoint, that kind of thing. But you could also reach out on Twitter to Patrick and say, hey, I know you really love horror games. I made a horror game that I think you'd be really into, and I know that you cover these things on video a lot. If you would just give this game a look, I'd appreciate it. And if you leave it at that, leave it at a tweet, an email, instead of spamming them constantly, then that could get Patrick's attention, which could lead to coverage on Waypoint. So I think if you just, don't go overboard is one of the big things. Everything in moderation, but there is something to be said for trying to reach out to people individually if you know they're into it. It's not a good idea to say like, hey, I see that you covered a lot of Japanese RPGs. Well, I made a visual novel, so obviously you'll be into it. Like, no, not necessarily. Like you've got to know who you're pitching, and like we were saying earlier, have a compelling story. Have something that sets you apart that isn't like, hey, I made a 2D side scroller that looks like an NES game. Like, well, guess what? There's quite a few of those right now. So like what makes you different? Why should I care? And the reason why I care could be, yes, this is in a genre that I really like, and I really like it, so you're pitching the right person. Or it could just be that you got a really famous name attached to your game, or it could be that you debuted a week ago and you've already got 100,000 downloads, something that's going to hook whoever you're pitching. And that hook can come in so many different flavors.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned the hook, because I was also wondering how much of the story do you already need to have written for the writer in that hook? If it's, when I was making this game, I was having bouts with depression, and this helped me to appreciate life, or something along those lines. How much do you actually want to feed ideas for the story to the writer versus just letting the work speak for itself?
Again, kind of, it's a balance thing. And unfortunately, I don't think there's like a good magic bullet answer for that. Because, like, amazingly enough, we also get pitches that are like, hey, I literally wrote this story for you if you'll just publish it. Like, no,
Oh, wow.
that's not how this works. Sorry. So you don't want to do that, especially because, you could be lying to us. You could be saying like, yeah, I was really depressed when I made this game and now I'm all bet. Like, no, I want to, as a journalist, actually talk to you and feel you out. And, there might be holes in your story that I start doubting, and then the story is going to be very different than what you initially thought it would be. So it can be a tricky balance, but coming to us with that kind of thing on a base level is good. So, another story I covered relatively recently was Mikey Newman, who used to be at Gearbox Software. Now he does Movies with Mikey, a YouTube show about movies. Great guy that I had met several times, really nice. A big part of his story was his health problems. He was in the hospital for an extended time in 2017, having had a stroke, and that kind of came through in his videos a little bit. And it helped that he was very open on Twitter and stuff about his health problems. He wasn't trying to hide it or anything. So that actually, and you don't want to ever take advantage of someone's health problems for a story or anything. I'm also someone who's had health problems, so I get that that's also a very delicate thing. But that does help make a compelling story. So since Mikey was very open about his issues anyway, I knew he'd be willing to talk about it. And he had a very cool YouTube show that was getting attention from Hollywood directors. So there was a lot there to make that story compelling and make that story worth doing. Even if he was, he wasn't PewDiePie. He wasn't like the top of YouTube charts, but he was a local guy with an interesting story and enough going for him to make that a compelling feature that my audience resonated with a lot too. And that's a big, tricky part that's kind of behind the scenes that anyone pitching the press kind of doesn't see, is that those of us who have been doing this for years, we kind of get a radar of like what actually is going to resonate with an audience and what isn't. We're not always right. Sometimes I actually write a story that I think people are going to love and it just falls flat traffic-wise, which is disheartening for me as much as it probably is for the people who I wrote about. But there's a lot of times where like we just kind of know, like if it's either in our interactions with you or playing the game you made or whatever, that there's just this innate feeling that comes having done this for years and years, where we're like, okay, yes, there's something here and I need to write about this now. So that's something that you, as the one pitching me, doesn't have a lot of control over, other than the fact that like hopefully you've made a really cool thing that maybe gets that response from me. But it's something that is playing a role in the background that you might just want to be aware of.
All right, we're here with Britton Peele. We're talking about doing some good pitches, and we'll be right back. Hey, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. And if you haven't already, please leave a rating on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you're listening to this, because it really helps people find out about the podcast and it motivates me to put out more content. Thanks for listening, and now back to the show. Actually, this is sort of the minutia of some of what we were talking about. One is with talking to people on Twitter. If people's DMs are closed, do you mean just mentioning them in a post?
Yeah, usually. So, you could just, do the @ reply thing to them. And some people, like I referenced Patrick Klepek in my example before, he's followed by a lot more people than I am. So that is going to be more easily lost in his shuffle than it would be mine, because I don't have as big of an audience. But it is still something to try, and something that, only takes a minute of your time. So if you've got that potential connection and you're looking just for avenues to try to get word out, then I say, why not? It's as long as you're not going to be going overboard and spamming every journalist that on Twitter, give it a shot, and good things could happen. It'll be okay.
Okay, and so that brings me to the next topic, which is We're on a podcast right now for game development. There are certainly some game developers that are above my weight class that I would like to have interviewed. And I'm curious, from a journalistic standpoint, how do you elicit a response from large studios when writing a story or for having an interview? For example, you're writing about a new Marvel movie. How are you going to get Chris Pratt to have a piece on what you're writing?
Totally. So the thing I would do, and even though your podcast is about game development, like I would probably start in a lot of ways with their press email address, which is usually, kind of a separate corner. And a lot of game developers probably know this too, because they probably made this very thing. It's usually like a separate corner of a website or a separate email address that is dedicated to reaching out for press reasons. And mostly, by press, a lot of people just mean getting the word out. So since you're doing a podcast where if you're talking to a game developer, their game is probably going to come up. So it can serve as press that they're on this podcast. So like if you want to talk to someone at id Software about Doom and you don't know anyone at id Software, then you could start with the press people, which will send you to someone who works at either Bethesda in-house, their in-house press people, or maybe 47, who is the press company that they use a lot of times to help send out review copies and stuff. You'll get in touch with someone there who can in turn get in touch with someone at id who can, say whether or not they want to come to the podcast. Other cases, like actually just reaching out to people, can be more successful than you would think it would be. At least in my experience, or maybe I'm just incredibly lucky and incredibly charming. But I mean, even when I was first getting into the business as a writer, I was sending messages to people way above my weight class that I really respected, just hoping to get an answer. And enough of them sent me back either advice or in rare occasions, help with getting work that I was able to get where I am now. But yeah, so I would maybe start with, in your case, maybe start with press emails or just trying to get in touch with people directly. Twitter can help with that. If you're just really open with like what you're trying to do, because it is a very specific thing. In the case of like the really heavyweights, like in my case, Chris Pratt, that was, like a Disney thing that would not have happened if I was not with the Dallas Morning News, because it's one of the biggest newspapers in the country. If I was at, and this is not to throw shade at other media outlets in the city, but other media outlets here that have less of a following, less of a subscriber base, didn't get the same opportunities as I do sometimes, just because of the size of our readership. So there is some degree of like, once you're let's say you're Supergiant Games, when you're developing Bastion, getting coverage at GameSpot may work out because you've got Greg Kasavin on your staff and he used to work there and you've got some connections. But once you make Bastion and that sells really well and is a blockbuster hit, it's a lot easier to get press coverage for Transistor. So that's just kind of one of those unfortunate things of like, when you've had a little success, then that can snowball into getting bigger guests on a podcast or getting bigger press outlets to pay attention to you, which sucks when you're the little guy and you're just trying to get 100 downloads. You're not worried about your first million. You're just worried about 50. I get it that it's really tough because I was there too as a writer, like who was writing things that hardly anyone was reading. But if you just like keep at it and eventually, like if you're making good stuff that really is resonating with some people, those people will tell other people. And that's been the case for me, is that like my career has very much been a snowball where I started very small. My parents didn't go to college. I don't come from like a writing family. I didn't have connections. That's something that with the press, a lot of people tend to assume that like it's an industry where people get work because everybody knows everybody. Like, no, most full-time game journalists are in, New York, San Francisco. I'm here in Dallas. There's not a lot of us here. There's a few, like Nathan Grayson at Kotaku was here in Dallas. Now he's not. But like when I started in this industry, I knew literally nobody. So I did a lot of the things that you're talking about. Is I would reach out to people on Twitter, or at the time I even reached out to some people on Facebook, which I actually would not do it again. I would not advise doing.
Oh, why is that?
It's just kind of a little too personal. Like even on me personally, for my Facebook, I don't even always accept friend requests from people I've met once, much less never met at all. So like I think I sent a Facebook message to Justin McElroy, who was one of the people I did this when I was like first starting out. And this was before Justin McElroy was a huge deal like he is now, but he was at Joystick. He was an editor, like he was a big deal in games press. I sent him a Facebook message that was really long, probably way too long. And just because like he is one of the nicest people around, he sent me a message back saying like, hey, I've noticed you and, want to actually help you, but can you please copy and paste this into an email and not Facebook, because my Facebook is more for like family and friends and stuff. So he was nice enough to like point me in that direction, and which is why I would say maybe don't go through Facebook to contact people. But I didn't know any better, and in that case it worked out because I sent Justin an email and he responded back with some very kind advice, very useful advice that I took advantage of. And then years down the road, he invited me onto his podcast, actually, Quality Control on Polygon. So like, that is a case of someone who I've seen him in person. I've never like really interacted with him in person, but started a digital relationship and punched above my weight class and started snowballing, because by the time, it was many years from the time I emailed him asking for advice to the time he emailed asking me to come on his podcast. So
I think that's another important thing is whenever you're reaching out to these people, that you don't have an ask right away.
Yeah, totally.
Maybe cultivating a relationship where there could be something in the future, but it's not like, oh, by the way, in my back pocket, I have this thing that I need to ask you about.
Totally.
But I really like how he gave you feedback that was actionable. Even just how I got a response to my email that I was writing, trying to get featured in that publication. It was something that was actionable that I could learn from.
Totally.
And that's something that is talked about a lot in the startup community now is, I think Ariana Huffington said that failure is a stepping stone to success. It's not a block to success. And this is jumping around, and sort of, I'm curious what your take is on media in terms of whenever you are writing about the most successful things that are going to get the biggest audience to listen to what's being written, do you think that perpetuates the survivorship bias that exists in this industry, and I'm sure in the startup scene and everywhere else, where it seems like people can't fail because failures just are being overlooked?
Okay, I see what you're saying. It's tricky, it's in this industry, especially, in game dev. It's amazing that it's so easy to make games now, except that it means there's a ton of junk for you to fight through if you've got something really special. Steam, is just filled with games all the time. The App Store is filled with games all the time. People looking for something new to play is, even if they don't want to pay a cent for it, don't have to look very far. And that really sucks. I don't envy anyone making a game right now for those reasons.
No, yeah, I think the last statistic I heard was there were about 1,000 new games that come out on iOS every day.
That's insane.
So, and people don't have the bandwidth with that. Not to mention, they want to play the new Switch title that's coming out. With our limited time that we have to try out new media, less and less people are trying some new indie game that comes out because, like you said, there's a lot of crap that comes out, and that causes people to play those games and then lose faith in trying something they've never heard of.
Totally.
There's a whole lot of shovelware out there. And because the barrier to entry with development has gotten so low that I can go to the Unity asset store and buy a platformer pack and in an afternoon reskin that, and I have a shippable game.
Yeah.
Another thing is like game jams. I love game jams because they're great as an individual learning new skills. It's almost like going to a writing workshop. But a game jam itself, you see that thousands of games are made in this weekend, and a lot of them are going to make their way onto the marketplace and just sort of add to this noise.
Totally.
So where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Myself? Man, I since I love video games so much, I always want to have at least a foot in this space. It's sometimes tough because, like, the Dallas Morning News is doing pretty well as far as newspapers go, but the newspaper industry itself not doing great. So, like, hopefully I still have a job there 5 years, and I think I will. But I want to stay writing is the main thing. Someday I would maybe like to write for games. Just this, and press isn't a stepping stone to that. It's just I like writing so much in general that I want to write a book. I've written a draft of a book that maybe will get published someday, maybe it won't. I just finished that last year. So hopefully I'll be writing fiction someday. Maybe I'll be writing for games someday. Maybe I'll still be doing the press thing, but maybe making a little bit more money or maybe a little less money. Who knows? But the only thing I can definitely say is that I'll still be writing. Like, I think I'm going to write until I die because it's just in my blood. And frankly, that's another thing that we should maybe touch on is that, at least maybe you can speak more to it from the game dev scene, but I would never tell anyone to get into writing unless they can't imagine themselves doing anything else, because it's really hard industry to break into. The pay is never going to be good unless you're J.K. Rowling. And, if I just wanted to make as much money as possible, I could go anywhere else. Yeah. So for writing, don't get into it if you could do anything else, and don't ever expect to get rich doing it. Game dev might be the same way. I don't know. Maybe you can.
Yeah, and what it makes me think of first is music, because I was a musician before coming to games, and somebody before told me that you learn to play guitar, and you play guitar because you love to play guitar, not because you want to be famous.
Sure, yeah.
And with games, I do think it's the same way. I interviewed Jonathan Holmes, who's a local developer, for the past podcast, and after the podcast, I asked him what his goals were, and he said he just wants to be working on games. Doesn't matter if he's in a cubicle making games for someone else or making it for himself. He wants to be there. That is the itch that he scratches to make his life complete.
Totally.
And with game development, it's a very interesting thing because you're wearing a lot of different hats. So whenever you're programming, whenever you're designing, whenever you're marketing, all very different things that you're doing. But the programming itself, you're solving problems, and solving those problems is really fun. You can really get lost in that to the point of the rest of the world just sort of falling away, and it's just you and figuring out this one physics bug of how do I get this guy on top of the platform.
Totally.
So I think that sentiment of being able to do this because you don't want to do anything else definitely would resonate with most people that are making games.
Good.
But as you also mentioned, you do so many things that are on your business card and your LinkedIn profile. We're individuals that like a lot of different things. So sometimes it is hard to just put on this hat and say, I'm a game developer, because I'm also a musician. I'm also a father. And, at certain times of the day, those things are more important than, you're switching hats.
Totally. And I think actually that makes you more interesting as a game developer and as a musician, is that, being well-rounded, I think, is important in any profession and just as a person. The people that tell me I only love video games and nothing else, like, okay, I actually don't think I'm going to get along with you too well, because like my closest friends at the Dallas Morning News aren't nerdy at all. My best friend there does not play games like whatsoever. She's a food writer. So we get along best because like our personalities are in sync. Like we can talk a lot about religion and stuff, about other things. But my main hobby is games. Hers is food. We don't share those things. I don't care much about food at all, but we can still get along. So I think it's great when you have multiple interests.
Yeah, I think it makes you a Renaissance person.
Yeah.
You do need I was describing this before, where you can have all of these different skills, but ideally there's one skill that you really excel at, and that's where you can sort of build everything off of.
Totally.
For me, I would say that's being a musician. I'm a musician first, programmer second.
And your game that I mentioned before is very music related, right? So
Yeah.
I like those things dovetail in a very nice way that I think is really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I do want to ask one last question because this is something that I've been challenged with in terms of marketing myself online with game development. Sometimes I wonder if the audience that I'm speaking to, if it's other game developers or if it's gamers, because those seem like they're two different audiences, yet most of the people I follow online are other game developers. Mm-hmm. Since you're writing about games, who do you think your audience is?
A lot of different. It can change by the week. So one of the interesting things for me being at a mainstream media company is that I'll illustrate this with a story. One year I was live blogging E3 stuff, and I think I had the EA stream hosted on my site, and I was live logging it and chatting with some people at the time. And I was like, man, there's like Mass Effect. Maybe we'll see it do Burnout, like this, gamer stuff that I really care about. The people in my chat, which was the Dallas Morning News chat, were like, I want to see The Sims. I want to see Madden. That's it. And like, as soon as those things were gone, they were done. They left the street. Like, Mass Effect was still waiting. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, the most exciting stuff is coming up. So the audience varies, and I have to be able to be malleable and change with what the audience might be at any given moment. I wrote about, I think, Pac-Man 256 at one point just because like I played it and thought it was really cool. I was like, I'm spending a lot of time thinking about this game, so I'm just going to write about it. And our Facebook comments were like, well, it's great that they did this with Pac-Man. They should bring back Mario next. I was like, that like Mario never went away. So sometimes though, I'm very much writing to people who love games and care about games a lot, and who know what Doom is. Like I wrote late last year when Wolfenstein 2 came out. I wrote a story about why Mesquite, Texas, is a prominent location in Wolfenstein 2. It's because its software started there, actually like 10 minutes from where I live now. And I had to write that in such a way that, like, yes, the people who played Doom and Wolfenstein 3D way back in the day, like, there's some actually casual gamers that know its software was here, even though they don't know about video games. And then there's some people who don't know anything about video games, but they love Mesquite. And then there's some people who really love video games now, but don't know anything about the history of its software. So I kind of had to hit all of those people with one story, and it's a really tricky thing to do. And I maybe couldn't have done it if I didn't have years of experience doing it already. So all that to give you a way too long answer for your question is that I think you need to be able to talk to different people at different times. And so maybe your Twitter right now is mostly other game developers, but who knows if a game developer with a bigger megaphone than you follows you, and then they retweet one of your tweets, suddenly that tweet meant for other game developers is being seen by a lot of non-game developers that are just gamers. So, which is not to say that you always have to think about the audience especially when you're tweeting, because like tweets can be pretty personal and they're so short. But you do kind of have to know that at any given moment, different people from different backgrounds could be looking at your stuff.
Well, great. I think that's a perfect stopping point for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out and talk about some games and media with us.
Thank you for having me. Hopefully it was helpful and not all rambling.
No, I think it's very helpful. Definitely. Yeah, this is it. We get a look behind the curtain of what's happening on the other end. Normally we're navigating auto responses. So,
sure.
So where can people find you online?
So a lot of my writing, since I'm full-time right now, is at guidelive.com/geek. That's the Dallas Morning News as like entertainment site. And I do a lot of Dallas focused stuff, but I'm also like reviewing Justice League and reviewing Star Wars, that kind of thing. So even if you're not in Dallas and you just like geeky things, a lot of my writing is there. I'm also pretty active on Twitter. It's just at Britton Peele, BrittonPeele. since I've got kind of a weird name. Those are probably the easiest 2 places to find me. So yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming out, and all the stuff that was mentioned I'll put in the show notes at gamedevdeconstructed.com. Any final asks of people?
Yeah, I mean, just the stuff that we've talked about, kind of pay attention to who you're pitching to. Please don't send me your beauty salon pitches. I have enough. It's okay. I'm okay with how I look. But thanks anyways. And to any game devs there who are looking for a big break and, have a cool game that they want to share. Like even if I don't respond to your email because I'm too busy, or if I respond saying I can't offer you coverage right now, it's not because I hate you or your game. Like I want all game developers who are passionate about their stuff to be successful, and I love video games. So definitely feel free to reach out, and sorry if I can't cover you, but I wish you the best no matter what.
All right. Thanks so much, Britton. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all next time. For show notes and links mentioned in the podcast, visit GameDevDeconstructed.com. Support the podcast by following us on Facebook and Twitter, and by rating and subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you stream the show. That's all for this episode, and I hope to see you all next time.